Hello, wishing all the unbreakables a powerful morning.
Good morning. What?
As Zelensky said, the planes are flying.
We'll bomb. What kind of planes are flying? We'll bomb everyone.
And the original pronunciation is preserved, and that's exactly what we're talking about now. The thing is, Zelensky is threatening Belarus, Zelensky is threatening Russia, and who isn't he threatening, really? But nevertheless, the situation in Ukraine, for example, in the Chernihiv region is not exactly favorable. And there are other problems there as well. Russia also has problems with fuel.
First of all, let's talk a little bit about regression today.
So let's begin. Zelensky made the following statement today. Honestly, it's a hard-hitting comment from him in which he says the following: Ukraine will force Russia to choose peace if Kyiv gets what was discussed with the G7 partners. And with the G7 partners, according to rumors, they were talking about nuclear weapons. Zelensky hinted at
A sort of digression.
that is, he wasn't just hinting, he was saying directly that it wouldn't be bad for Ukraine to restore its nuclear status, and there are two possible scenarios, bad and very bad. There's no such thing as a good scenario when it comes to nuclear weapons. Did you think there was a good scenario with nukes? Of course not. So, the bad scenario is that Ukraine is given the opportunity to restore its nuclear status with the help of tactical nuclear weapons, in other words, something powerful. Enriched uranium is provided. Technologies for creating missiles that can use this nuclear uranium are supplied. Technologies that have long been forgotten. Of course, these are not long-range or strategic missiles. And everything is going according to this scenario. A very bad scenario is the so-called dirty bomb. A dirty bomb, I've said this many times, but if you missed it, I'll briefly repeat it once more. We take a suitcase, just an ordinary suitcase, put some dynamite or something like that inside. The main thing is that it explodes. You add some kind of nuclear material, it doesn't really matter, radioactive, maybe dust, it really doesn't matter at all. The point is, there has to be some highly radioactive substance. At the right moment, this suitcase explodes and all of this gets spread over an area depending on the amount of explosives and the wind from hundreds of meters to several kilometers. Naturally, it becomes impossible to live, work, or do anything else in that area for the foreseeable future. Well, just imagine if this happened in some populated area. Obviously, if it goes off in a deep forest where only hedgehogs and bears live, then no one except those hedgehogs and bears, figuratively speaking, would be affected. But in a densely populated metropolis, this would be a huge problem. It's impossible to avoid, impossible to solve, and you can only slightly mitigate it. That's why this is an extremely scary threat. And Zelensky says the following: our operation, including in Crimea, is carefully calculated. And the way it continues absolutely proves it. If digressia is about what we discussed with our partners within the G7, well, Russia and Ukraine will appear, and it depends on the decision of the partners. Again, the partners here are the United Kingdom, but Starmer has left. That's why this decision might, I think, be a little bit up in the air, kind of floating digressia. We will promptly create conditions under which Russia will be forced to choose peace. Zelensky also added that Ukraine is really counting on a positive response from its partners who clearly know what this is about. The president of Ukraine did not reveal exactly what he meant, but you don't have to be a genius to figure it out, and now we all know this. Among those who might have it, it's nuclear weapons, meaning both the knowledge and the technology. There's also France, but Monsieur Macron isn't at the height of his popularity either, so I think after Starmer no one will really think about it. As for, by the way, Merz, who is a protege, he's already, well, kind of started thinking about it. Nevertheless, he made the following statement. I posted it on my Telegram channel today. He is not going to resign like Starmer did, even though his popularity is even lower than Starmer's. In response to a question from an AfD lawmaker about the possibility of resignation due to Merz's low popularity, he replied that he intends to solve the problems facing Germany. You see a coalition and a federal government under my leadership. They are determined to solve the problems of our country. We are doing this step by step, even if you don't like it and even if you oppose most of the decisions we make here. Well, that's a rather strange statement, and I don't know how true it is. Again, it's just a statement that we are solving problems step by step. In reality, Germany's economy is declining. The number of people receiving assistance is increasing, and the amount of funds provided to countries, including Ukraine, is also increasing. And today I also read, by the way, an interesting piece of news that the long-term aid to Yemen, measured in hundreds of millions of euros, well, since we're in Europe, It was simply, well, being absorbed, so to speak, and the people who received it, various representatives of public organizations, held numerous trainings, published all sorts of literature, and so on. Well, here I can say as someone who was once quite close to public organizations. There, if you lack a conscience, you can get so much money, again, provided you have access to a certain amount of grants that no other field could even dream of. Because you can just make up some seminar or workshop about helping, well, roughly speaking, help yourself out of thin air. Psychological problems of hedgehogs in the fog, problems of little horses in that same fog, problems of Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore, and the problems of bees when some bear is approaching them on a balloon. You could spend more money there than you could ever dream of. Again, if the person organizing all this has a certain lack of principles, and here, well, there will be such rumors. I'm by no means making any claims, I'm just passing on what I read today, that's all. Zelensky also stated that Ukraine's long-range strikes are achieving their goals, disrupting Russia's military logistics, and a fuel shortage due to attacks on refineries is already being observed in more than 60 Russian regions. Well, I'm not sure about the 60 part. But indeed this problem exists, I've talked about it more than once, but there are commentators, by the way, who still say, no, that's not true, everything is fine. We filled up with 150,000 liters of fuel, went on a cruise along the equator and flew to Alpha Centauri on the same fuel. Well, that's great. In general, I always try to be a realist. And in my opinion, sugarcoating situations just points to really deep problems. But again, we'll talk about that later. For now, write in the comments everything you think about this, and then what? And then Zelensky announced that the Russian retransmitters in Russia and Belarus, which were used for strikes on Ukraine, had stopped working. Here, let me remind you that 5 days ago, Zelensky said that there are certain radio signal retransmitters on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, which allow Russia to study Russia and the situation in Ukraine and more accurately guide their drones and ballistic missiles. Zelensky stated this in the sense that if Belarus does not stop working with these retransmitters, then Ukraine will help them put an end to it. And he waited for a response from Lukashenko for a week. 5 days passed, and according to some Telegram channels, Lukashenko said, these are not ours, these are some shady ones. Now I'll show you again in the same Telegram channel that these are some kind of grey devices that they used in Belarus, but nevertheless, Belarus will take care of their elimination. Here I found it, they write the following, I don't know how true this is, again this news appeared in some Telegram channels. The Investigative Committee of Belarus has established the fact of illegal placement of communication equipment, so-called grey repeaters, in the Gomel region. Who placed them there still needs to be determined. And Lukashenko took all this under his control. Well, that's how it is. Zelensky stated that yes, everything is fine, everything has been eliminated. I don't know whether they have been dismantled or not, but we are working on it and I am closely monitoring the situation, receiving reports daily. Then they say that the fact is the repeaters are not working today. There are two possible options here. First again, a good and a bad one, or rather a bad one and a very bad one. The first is that there were no repeaters at all, well, they just didn't exist. Zelensky decided, well, now apparently we're going to do something powerful. Maybe some consultant told him, let's say this, and he announced loudly that there were some repeaters, and 5 days later he said there weren't any. Well, I can say that there's some kind of transneutrino bomb next to me, and for 5 days I think it needs to be removed, and after 5 days I'll say there's no transneutrino bomb. It disappeared, it was removed, it's the Anunnaki, they flew off to Alpha Centauri and blew it up there, so that's the first option. The second option is that there really were some repeaters, and that Lukashenko is gradually backing down and is caught between a rock and a hard place. Let's put it this way, on one side is Russia, on the other side is Ukraine, plus the European Union and the USA, with whom Belarus has agreed to cooperate. Exactly, the USA. Right now, Belarus has a very good relationship with them, and I think Lukashenko really doesn't want to ruin it. Well, maybe there are other opinions too, of course. If you have one, write it in the comments. This is just a close opinion of the third kind. Let me rephrase the title of a well-known science fiction movie. As for Ukraine, well, it seems like everything is fine, but they say things aren't going well on the Ukrainian front either, and naturally everything can't be perfect. Because so far there are no signs of any breakthroughs in the DNS, just like you can't see your own ears. So, unexpectedly, in the border areas of the Chernihiv region, a mandatory evacuation was announced for 12 villages. This was announced by the head of the Chernihiv Regional Military Administration himself, who clarified that the decision was made at the request of the military. There's no point in listing all these settlements, but it's worth mentioning that a decision was made to extend the mandatory evacuation for 7 border villages where it was previously announced in the winter. And this head noted that about 1,000 people still remain in these settlements, including 120 children. Let me remind you that under the new Ukrainian legislation, children can be evacuated forcibly, or rather compulsorily, though it's not called forcibly, but you know, that's just semantics. The territorial recruitment centers are working on notifying the population, and in much the same compulsory way, children are being sent to seemingly safe places. So everything here is kind of strange, and honestly, not everything is going well there. That's regarding the first section of the first part of our Moralizon ballet. Now, the second part is the situation with fuel in the Russian Federation. No matter how you look at it, from whatever angle, again, no matter how you look at these things, there's nothing good there. We're being told that the Moscow oil refinery won't resume operations this year after the drone strikes. And I think there's some truth to that, because in reality it was actually bombed there. Besides those very tanks, there are also devices that allow crude oil to be processed into petroleum products like gasoline, diesel, and everything else. These aren't cheap units, not cheap modules. You can't just restore them on a whim, like some engineer comes in, clicks a button, snaps his fingers, and everything starts working again. You can't do that. You need spare parts, you need modules, and here the situation is the opposite of what I was talking about in the winter. That is, in Ukraine, it was about the same with the power stations. They bombed some massive multi-ton transformer, and you couldn't just remove it on a whim either. You need to get the right spare parts from somewhere. And in the capitalist world, they are all so highly standardized and differentiated, it's crazy. If there could be just one standard, but in the capitalist world, well, not to mention that different countries have different plugs and accordingly different sockets in the walls, so you can also say that different countries have different standards. And regarding power systems and to restore, let me rephrase once again the customs officer from White Son of the Desert. The grenades have to be of that model. If not, then everything will be complicated. In short, that's what I'm getting at. What am I even talking about, right? These modules at the refinery need to be replaced with parts built to the exact standards they were designed for from the countries where they were made. And nowadays it's not that easy to achieve this. So, the refinery on the southern outskirts of the Russian capital was hit by drones twice on June 16 and 18. Both times, the primary oil processing units were damaged and the plant stopped operating. One of the agency's sources said that repairs will take at least 6 months, and Gazprom Neft did not respond to Reuters' inquiry. Well, honestly, what is there to say if the situation is really obvious? As for the refinery, we're told that it's the largest fuel supplier for the capital region, providing more than 30 fuel deliveries per year. The plant has a capacity of 14 million tons per year, and it produced about 3 million tons of gasoline and roughly the same amount of diesel fuel by mass, actually by weight. The repairs could cost $1 billion, which is a huge amount. If you take into account that not only this refinery was bombed, but also the ones in Nizhnekamsk, Tyumen and Volgograd, then, well, we're talking about huge amounts here. On top of that, there's also the lost profit or even just revenue due to the reduced volume of fuel exports sent abroad. To cover this gap that's forming, rumor has it that the Russian government has already allowed lowering gasoline quality standards and is preparing to start importing fuel from India as well as from Kazakhstan. With airlines, the issue is kerosene, not diesel fuel of course, but still. Azimut Airlines reported a critical situation with aviation fuel in Russia. The company stated that in early June, the main aviation fuel supplier announced the need to reduce consumption by about a third of the declared volumes. The reason is a force majeure situation at the oil refineries, those very drone attacks. In addition, fuel prices have sharply increased at the same time, the airline emphasizes. Since the beginning of June, the price of aviation fuel at Russian airports has increased by an average of 17%. And in Makhachkala, that's where they were looking for someone in the jet engines. You remember that case, I hope? The price of kerosene has increased by 64% and reached 157,000 rubles. That's, well, not insignificant. That's not a small amount. Two airlines have stated that carrying out the planned flight schedule is turning into a farce, losing all economic sense, so, well, everything is coming to a halt. And what else? Also, Russia has asked Kazakhstan to sell 50,000 tons of gasoline. These negotiations are underway now. They're planning to buy AI-92 gasoline, but Kazakhstan itself doesn't really have that much of its own gasoline. That's why they say Russia is unlikely to be able to count on all of this. Nevertheless, Putin himself says that the crisis in Russia will not affect the war in Ukraine. The fight is ongoing, but Putin has called for the threats to be minimized. He concluded the meeting in which he spoke about these issues with a speech by Reshev, who said that the threats that Russia is trying to create for the Kyiv regime should be minimized. Well, all of this can be summed up with that very saying, well, it's a joking phrase, do what you should and don't do what you shouldn't. And such valuable advice will cost you, dear viewers, I think, well, about 5,000. So send it to the author of this channel, and don't forget to subscribe to both the author and the channel so you can get all these valuable tips for free. Well, now let's move on to the powerful leaders. Because over there everyone is expressing their opinions about the situation with the war, with Crimea, with fuel, and really about anything you can think of. Oh my goodness, there are such interesting people there, and now I'm going to introduce you to them. Well, as usual, you're familiar with most of them, but there are also some new characters. Let's start with someone. Let's start with the evaluator of their own actions.
We are as satisfied as possible with our work, but unfortunately, our work did not bring results. Yes.
The work did not bring results, as always, and that's exactly why, but what?
The road is not going quite in that direction. Not in that direction.
Big Zo, it all went that way. Well, now let's listen to what many of you so-called people think. For example, we have some statistics on Brady. Those who are in a military situation or in uniform, like with infrared vision goggles that can see all the way to Alpha Centauri, claim that she says he's fighting at the front. Well, that's how it is. She says there are enough vacancies in the military units of the Ukrainian armed forces, so who can you go as? Assault cook, assault drone operator, assault trooper, assault stormer, assault specialist, assault landing operator. Well, all kinds of assault troops are needed, so there's no problem. But let's take a look. The angry guy on the left and the exemplary comrade on the right. For now, the greatest need for vacant positions today is in Gergen. We have vacancies in our brigade. Yes, these little mustaches, excuse me, are like a pass in the underwear of this character. And I'll put on just in case glasses for extra power. But so that this ionizing radiation which penetrates our brains when watching the telethon doesn't affect the brain at all, but passes by and reflects off the most important part.
It was honest, I'll say it again. Everything depends on people's willpower.
Well, for example, a person wants to eat dumplings. He eats dumplings, but honestly, if you're someone like Dikij or someone like Laptin or Bereza or someone else, these people can eat dumplings while sitting in Austria or fly to Italy, no problem. But if you're an ordinary person, you come to the army office or the recruitment center, there they give you this electronic point, the E-point, and you go and choose. You can choose any position you want to storm. The range of options and possibilities is extremely wide, really.
Chancellor, you fight and catch. I'll list a few vacancies for you to handle. Business inspector, video footage, responsible execution.
The range of video footage, HR, so you just sit there and choose, which stormtrooper to send to the position today.
Here is a warehouse storekeeper, a frontline supply driver, and more combat roles. These are UAV operators. As you can see, look.
He's squinting his eyes. Apparently his available RAM is running out. And he's looking down, trying to find where it's written what he needs to say today.
And even combat positions, such as shooting from machine gun and grenade launcher positions.
He looks to the side like that. God, I wonder what's written there. I don't remember anything. And you, positions like machine gunner, assault trooper? No, you can't say that because, come on, what are you doing?
We understand that everyone is concerned about their life and health and doesn't want to end up in the infantry.
Well, obviously, if the infantry division or whatever unit they have there needs people, what do they want? They want a cook specifically, or a clerk. Apparently, regular infantrymen aren't needed by anyone, judging by this story. The tanned journalist disapproves, though to be fair, he always looks that way. He probably even looks at his wife like that, sorry. Or at his parrot, or at his porridge. He's always suspicious about that porridge, like maybe someone did something to it. No, well, but the character on the right, well, he's magnificent if he wants...
So we're not forbidding it, we're actually encouraging him for that role.
In the army, infantrymen aren't needed. That's magnificent. Let's just believe it. Then who else do we have? There's also, well, the historian Poli, who had a stomachache and claimed that he was poisoned by the Russians. That's a separate story. I've already shown him to you. We have this kind of female deputy, not a deputatkinya, call her whatever you want. Otiana Hubko or Hubko, however you want to call her. She usually sits in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and says all sorts of things there. But now she suddenly ended up in the studio and is telling something very powerfully. Well, here you just can't do without the power glasses that block, again, this radiation.
Ukraine has taken the initiative, marking a turning point. And they can't help but notice this turning point, because if they didn't, and I think Putin is afraid of a general mobilization.
Well, here we have two women who brought about the turning point sitting here, one in a red jacket, the other not in red, and they're going on about something. Then there's also a female deputy, her name is Serko. That's interesting, this female deputy is trying to foist something on the journalist on the right with this serious, strained expression. Well, and Volodymyr Horbach is also looking at all this with a strained expression, just absorbing what this very female deputy is saying. Well, that's all wonderful.
Всередині Росії. Насправді проблеми всередині набагато більш небезпечні.
To say the word inside 3 times in 4 seconds, that's a skill. That's no small feat.
For Putin, they lost the money, they lost Ukraine.
It's just that you say...
Radio beacons.
There's a guy sitting there, 3 here, and someone speaking from behind a screen. What's going on? Where is this? It's like those Science Channel guys under the table, except they're not guys and not under a table.
They shortened it, he's useless, we'll lose the war, so they should surrender and give us 500 billion.
Who's saying that? Well, yeah. What is this? What's going on?
548 billion, and after that, what will they do next? We'll gut them, take all the oil.
Lee are flying like that? They're going to bomb, we'll gut everything, says this female deputy. Well, wonderful. Well then, go ahead, go to Frind, gut bomb, launch the planes, let everything fly and bomb there. Well, it all looks very interesting, of course. Well, alright. So that's how things are. I mean, really, there are 2 crises right now. The first is that the military crisis in Ukraine continues with this terrible forced conscription roundups. The second is in the Russian Federation. Suddenly, in just a couple of months, a very deep fuel crisis has emerged. No matter what anyone says, it really exists. And in addition, Ukraine also has problems with the war itself, with logistics and everything else. When all this gets resolved, and who will resolve it? Well, write your opinion in the comments. So, subscribe to the channel. Bye, everyone.
Were there cases where people came voluntarily?
To tell one story. Recently, a 20-year-old girl joined us. Small, not very tall. A little girl, quiet. You would never say she's a real Titan warrior. On her first rotation, she took position. She did great. No one expected such a fragile girl to have such a strong character. So when a person hesitates, when a person is afraid, that's when the sergeant needs to show the consequences of the job.